Hello listeners and welcome to the Flore. You can sit here and watch this YouTube video on the history and the lore that you're interested in, but we have done something to make it a lot easier for you. We have made a podcast, and what that means is that you can get an app on your phone like Stitcher or Podkicker or Podbean and just any of the infinite podcast apps, and just set it to automatically subscribe and download, and you will get all the episodes of Flore automatically on your phone, and you can listen to them while you drive to work, while you cook, clean, shop, and do all the other menial tasks of life, so that when you have time to sit down and watch a lore YouTube video, you can sit down and play instead. But if you really like watching YouTube videos, we have this as well. I hope you enjoy the show. We are going to be covering the history and the lore of Baldur's Gate. Particularly, we're going to kind of look at some of the smaller pieces of lore that you brush up against that might have hints at some of what's coming in Baldur's Gate 3. And we'll talk about why they're so far apart and some of the bigger differences here. In the beginning, let's talk about the Forgotten Realms, Faerun, and what all of that means. So if you're new to D&D and you don't know exactly what's going on. So first of all, Dungeons & Dragons lore is written differently than most lore you encounters. A lot of mythologies written within human cultures are designed to kind of teach and imbue cultural values, whereas Dungeons & Dragons is not written that way. The lore is written with intentional gaps, mysteries, and contradictions to stimulate the imagination of the players and the readers, to say, hey, there's this really cool unknown thing, and we can create a whole adventure around that. And that's how the lore is intentionally written. As a lot of players will know them as hooks, right? It's an intentional unknown thing so that you can play out this grand adventure, and this grand adventure you have doesn't change the lore of the game going forward, because that was an unknown thing anyway.
And it's more like you have rumors.
What is the Forgotten Realms? So the Forgotten Realms is a campaign setting. And what this means is this is a time and a place, so that you have an understanding of the culture, the technology.
So, real quick, sorry. And my question is, I always had the misconception that the Forgotten Realms was a universe, like a specific, its own universe. But you're saying it's a specific point in time.
Yeah, so it's a point in time and place. And
okay, so it's different than what I...
Yeah, so I mean, it's part of a universe, right? That's time, that's more place as well. But Forgotten Realms is also isolating a specific time in that. So the world that this is going to take place on is Toril, and it's going to have, there are dimensions connecting to Toril, and there are also other worlds around Toril, other planets. But the time frame in which these adventures take place is referred to as Del Reckoning. And so this is a reference to a treaty between humans and elves, the Delmen and the elves of Cormanthir. And so from the point of this treaty on, everything is referred to as Del Reckoning. But because this is the time in which the campaigns are taking place, anything before this time period is referred to as Del Reckoning in the negative sense, right? So we'll have negative 1,000 years Del Reckoning, which is this event happened 1,000 years before the Del Reckoning. Technology-wise, this is largely swords and shields, bows. However, they do have gunpowder, which they refer to as smoke powder. But you won't, it's going to be a rare occasion you'll see any kind of weapon. Maybe once in a while you see a dwarf or a gnome using a flintlock weapon. But most technology advances are kind of a fusion of magic and the existing technology of swords and bows and stuff.
Okay, so the flintlock is more so rudimentary or so expensive that it's just not worth having, or a little bit of both?
So if you're familiar with a flintlock weapon, what you do is you load your powder, you load your cartridge, and then you light a fuse and you hold the weapon as the fuse winds down. They are not great combat weapons. Like in the early years of human history, our current history, the flintlock rifle was largely a sniper's weapon. It was set up on a tripod, you locked your target, and then you could light that fuse while holding the rifle in position the whole time waiting for it to go on. It was not, you were far better off with a bow and arrow or a crossbow than a flintlock weapon.
Or a wand.
Super inefficient. Okay.
Yeah, so like I said, long-range snipering or even shotgun blasting, like grape shot as they would have called it, would really be the only two reasons to use a flintlock over any kind of other weapon.
Question. I'm going to use the gnomes as an example. Since the gnomes love learning and technology, would it be possible in a campaign setting to find someone with a more effective flintlock weapon?
If we start pushing the edge of flintlock weaponry, we kind of move beyond how the culture of the Forgotten Realms is, and that moves us back to Eberron, which we've been talking about. Whereas Eberron, they're going to say, the flintlock is really slow, let's use some magic to make this into a cool weapon.
Okay, whereas here it's more, that's as good as it's going to get, let's focus on other things like
let's focus on just a better magic in my axe kind of thing.
Okay, so that's not really even something they've considered.
Yeah, so it's more of a cultural approach to building this.
They don't have the mechanical magic function, that steampunk feel to Forgotten Realms. That's an Eberron kind of thing. Like in Eberron, they have the train that travels on a lightning rail. There's none of that in Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, Forgotten Realms is very traditional fantasy. If you think Tolkien, if you think Dragonlance, that is Forgotten Realms kind of world and culture. So the final piece of understanding what Forgotten Realms means is a great example of this. It's a very old world with a lot of history that is forgotten and overlooked. And so the example that one of the creators said is, he says, if we look at the city of Waterdeep, this is a human city that is built on the ruins of an elven city that is built on the ruins of a dwarven city. And that is the essence of the Forgotten Realms. We have ancient empires and technologies and just all of that that's come and gone and built up and come and gone. And so there's just multiple layers to everything in that sense. And that is what has kind of created the rich world of the Forgotten Realms and why it is so popular, is you can just keep digging to the deeper levels below.
Which is why you just have dungeons upon dungeons upon dungeons.
Yeah. So that is what you get in the Forgotten Realms. So Toril, as I mentioned before, is the planet on which we find the adventures of the Forgotten Realms. And then the continent is Faerun. And I point that out because there are other continents, but some cultures better mirror the Middle East, some cultures better mimic the Far East with ninjas and samurais, whereas the others would have sheiks and jinns. And so the Faerun is where you get more of that very classic fantasy, more of the European medieval. So that is what I'm referring to when I say the Forgotten Realms and what it means in a campaign setting. Where in time and culture are we? Okay,
so it's very different than Eberron.
Yes. As we're talking about Baldur's Gate, the game begins in a place called Candlekeep. And the game itself starts in the 1300s, Del Reckoning. But I want to go back to the very beginning of Candlekeep because I think it's important for understanding how this might connect to Baldur's Gate 3. So
real quick, where does Baldur's Gate originate from?
So Baldur's Gate the game starts in Candlekeep. The major city you'll interact with is, of course, Baldur's Gate. Then eventually you'll move south into and a few other places.
Did Baldur's Gate start out in the lore of D&D, or did it start out with the original video game Baldur's Gate?
So Baldur's Gate is a true campaign. They took a piece of lore and then found a mystery within that lore or an untold story and then created their own adventure in it. So it is
interesting.
It is a true campaign in that sense. And I'll get into that and point that out. So let's go back. So this is all lore at this point. So let's go back to Candlekeep. Before it is called Candlekeep, it is simply a library fortress owned by a very powerful mage. In the year 75, Aluwando was the powerful mage who had this library fortress, and he made many prophecies, and they came true. And among these prophecies made by Aluwando is the Baal spawn. So he prophesied that Baal, the god over murder and death and destruction, would come down in avatar form and impregnate a multitude of women, and then he would be slain. And Baal, his purpose in impregnating all of these women across multiple races was that when all of these children were born and then died, when each one died, the tiny bit of deity that he had put in them at conception would coalesce. And once all of these pieces recoalesced, he would be able to come back to life.
Yikes.
And so this is
That's a dark ritual.
So this is the prophecy
take notes.
Of the ball spawn set out by Aluwando. And many of his other prophecies also come true as well. And so very quickly, like Aluwando is very famous across all of Faerun. People want to know his prophecies. He creates this huge library, one of the greatest collection of books all across all of Faerun. And then he dies. And it is upon his death that his fortress library is converted into what is known as Candlekeep. Now, in the arcane magics of Faerun, there is a spell that was created so that people could speak with the dead. Upon his death, many people wanted the skull of Aluwando, because if you had his skull, you could use this spell to communicate with him, and he could continue to reveal prophecies about the future of Faerun. Shortly after he dies, it disappears. So this is the first point where we might be connecting to Baldur's Gate 3, because the Illithids, or the Mind Flayers, those creatures with, it looks like a tentacle beard, they want this skull.
All right, guys, so before we get back into Aluwando and his skull, Eli's actually got some life hacks to help you be more efficient at learning lore and maximizing gaming. Eli, what you got for us today?
Play Flore episodes while you wait in load screens or elevators. They're pretty much the same thing. And while you're waiting for that load screen to finish, tab over with your browser, hit us up on Patreon. After all, we are filling all those boring load screens for you. And we both know there are a lot of them.
And so I'm going to jump really briefly into the story of the Mind Flayers, because it's important to understand why this skull is so valuable to them. And that is that if we look at the whole history of all of Faerun and all of Toril, like the whole planet, even the whole universe of the Forgotten Realms, with eventually the Mind Flayers conquer and enslave every living race. And then all of them work together to bring about a massive uprising, which leads to the destruction and crumbling of the Illithid Empire. And as their empire is crumbling, they build a time machine and they send an Illithid back in time. And his purpose, right, this is very much Terminator, right? His purpose is to figure out where the Illithids go wrong in their conquering of the worlds, and how do we prevent it from happening. And so they're in this time loop. They build up the great empire, and then the revolt comes. They build up the great empire, and the revolt comes. And they're slowly tweaking and changing things each time they go back in time, hoping to prevent the destruction of their empire.
Right.
And they want the skull of Aluwando because that stops the loop. Now they can ask Aluwando the prophecies instead of having to live out the events, and they can make changes before. And so their belief is that if they can get the skull of Aluwando, it will finally end the cycle, because they will know all events before they occur and can prepare for them.
But currently in the great arc of things, they are trapped in a time loop.
Yes, they're trapped in this time loop, trying to find a way not to be wiped out. Yes. So this is the first potential hook for Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 1 takes place in Candlekeep, or at least it starts there. And that is where the skull of Aluwando was last seen, and it is the former fortress of the great sorcerer Aluwando. Okay, so that's our first point. Okay, so then the story of Baldur's Gate is, of course, the story of Ballspawn. So we've got to go a little bit more into the history here, because once you understand the history of the Time of Troubles and of the Lord of Murder Ball, the whole story of Baldur's Gate is just really simple to understand. One of the things foretold by Aluwando is what a period of time known as the Time of Troubles. So when all of the worlds are being created by the over-deity Ao, you could think of it as Alpha and Omega, just Ao. So when he's creating all of the worlds, we have the Dawn War, which we talked about in the creation of Eberron. The planet Toril is created. Then a war breaks out between the gods and the primordials. And to end this war, Ao tears the planet into two. One is Abir, and the other is Torah. Abir is given to the primordials. Torah is given to the gods. And that ends the war. And the divider between these two different worlds is
let me just
fate. Okay, go ahead.
Let me just recap that. But okay. So Ao is the over deity. He creates a world, but the beings start to fight on the world, so he rips it in half so that they can have their own worlds, and he separates them.
Yes, so he separates them with the Tablets of Fate. Now, that is one of the purposes of the Tablets of Fate, to maintain these two worlds in different places to prevent war from breaking out between his children again. The second thing that the Tablets of Fate do is they record all of the details of the gods, all of their strengths, all of their weaknesses, all of their responsibilities and capacities. And it is that knowledge carved into the Tablets of the Fate that a small group of select gods want for themselves, because the gods continue to war among each other all the time. And this small group of gods believe that if we can steal the Tablets of Fate, we will know the weaknesses of all our enemies and we will rule over all the gods.
Yikes.
And so they make an attempt. As punishment for their crimes, Ao condemns all the gods with the exception of one. And the condemnation and punishment is that all of them will walk the earth in mortal forms, subject to mortal weakness and even physical death. And this time period where all the gods will be cast down is known as the time of troubles. This is when Baal, the god of murder, comes down to Faerun in mortal form, and he has seen the prophecies of Alando, and he knows he will die during the time of troubles while he is mortal. So as soon as he takes on his mortal form, he gets his followers to begin bringing women to him in masses, some willingly, some not, and he impregnates them so that when he dies, he will have this path back to life.
Okay.
And this is where the Baal spawn come from. They are the children of the Lord of Murder, and they carry a piece of his deity in him.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Flore. If you liked what you were hearing, or even if you didn't, feel free to leave us a review or comment down below. We'd love to get some feedback. We want to know, what did we miss? What do you want to hear more about? What did Eli and Joe get wrong? Obviously, I got nothing wrong. If you see our ads, like, comment, or even share them. That means that helps us know that they're working. Please tell your friends about us. We love being able to share our passion for lore with you, and if you like it too, we'd love for you to be able to share it with your friends. And please, send us corrections. We do our research, we do our best, but this is D&D. I'm sure there's something we missed or didn't quite expound on as much as you might have liked. So please send us corrections or suggestions for the next episodes. If you do want to talk to us or have us do a specific episode, either leave a comment below or email us at flore, Flore, .fantasylore@gmail.com. You can find us on patreon.com/florefantasyandlore. Thanks again so much for listening. And now that we have given you the foundation and the floor, go and build your story.